The taxi sputtered, its yellow paint a stark contrast to the imposing wrought-iron gates ahead. Laurence leaned forward, impatience twitching in his brow.
Just here is fine, driver.
The car lurched to a stop, the smell of exhaust fumes mingling with the damp scent of overgrown ivy. Laurence stepped out, his trench coat billowing slightly in the breeze, and surveyed the scene. The mansion loomed, a gothic silhouette against the overcast sky.
Detective Xeon? Thank goodness you've come.
The foyer was a cavernous space, shadows clinging to the corners like unwelcome guests. Laurence inhaled sharply, the air thick with the scent of decay and something metallic. He followed the woman, Mrs. Caldwell, deeper into the mansion. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor, a mournful rhythm that seemed to amplify the silence. They passed by darkened portraits, the eyes of long-dead ancestors seeming to follow their every move. Laurence felt a chill despite the suffocating stillness of the house.
This way, Detective.
Mrs. Caldwell paused at the entrance to a dimly lit study, her hand trembling as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell hit Laurence first, a wave of nausea rising in his throat. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. On the floor lay the body, sprawled amidst overturned furniture and scattered papers. Laurence crouched beside the body, his gaze clinical, detached. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Laurence surveyed the scene. He moved with practiced ease, his movements economical, his gaze sharp and observant. A shattered wine glass lay near the body, its contents spilled across the Persian rug like drops of blood. The study was in disarray, but there was a strange order to the chaos, as if someone had tried to stage a struggle, to throw him off the scent. The weight of the case settled upon him, heavy and suffocating. He adjusted his fedora, a spark of determination igniting in his eyes. The game was afoot.
Tell me everything, Mrs. Caldwell,
Laurence instructed, his voice quiet but firm. She sat perched on the edge of a velvet chaise lounge, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He observed her from across the room, noting the tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes darted nervously around the room.
He was a good man, Detective. Kind, generous, but...
Her words trailed off, lost in the cavernous space of the drawing room.
But
he had his enemies, Detective. Powerful men who wouldn't hesitate to...
She couldn't bring herself to say the word, but it hung in the air between them, unspoken, yet deafening in its implication. Murder. Laurence absorbed her words, filing them away for later analysis. Everyone had secrets, skeletons hidden in their closets, and this grand old mansion seemed to whisper of a past shrouded in darkness. The study was a microcosm of the man himself, Laurence mused, as he carefully stepped over a fallen stack of leather-bound books. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, with a faint hint of something floral lingering beneath. A woman's perfume, perhaps?
he followed the trail of blood, his heart quickening as it led him to a hidden compartment beneath the desk. Carefully he pressed on a concealed latch and the panel swung open, revealing a small velvet-lined drawer. Inside, nestled amongst a pile of letters bound with a faded pink ribbon, lay a gun, a small pearl-handled derringer, its silver glinting dully in the dim light.
Lawrence's gut twisted. This changed things. This wasn't just a crime of passion, a random act of violence. This was premeditated, planned, executed with cold, calculated precision. The letters were brittle with age, the ink faded, but the words they contained were like sparks, igniting a firestorm of emotions. They were love letters, passionate and desperate, penned by a woman deeply in love. But the object of her affection was not her husband. The name that appeared again and again, scrawled across the pages with a desperate longing, was the victim's. Mr. Caldwell.
He returned to the study, his mind racing. The gun, the letters, the staged crime scene. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but they didn't quite fit.
He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. He needed to look at this from a different angle, to see past the obvious and uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deceit.
What am I missing?
Laurence stood before the shattered wine glass, its jagged edges catching the light. He had been so focused on the gun, the letters, the obvious clues, that he had overlooked something crucial, something hidden in plain sight.
He crouched down, carefully examining the shards of glass scattered across the rug. Most were stained with wine, but one glinted differently in the dim light. He picked it up gingerly, holding it up to the light. It wasn't wine that coated the glass, but something else, something viscous and clear, almond, the telltale scent of cyanide.
The scent of lilies clung to the air, a cloying sweetness that seemed to mock the grim reality of the situation. Laurence stood in the doorway of the mansion's conservatory, the glass-enclosed space a haven of lush greenery and vibrant blooms. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, casting an ethereal glow on the exotic plants and flowers. It should have been a place of tranquility, yet an unsettling chill ran down Laurence's spine.
Why do I feel like someone's watching me?
His gaze swept over the manicured flower beds, his keen eyes searching for any sign of disturbance. He noticed a pair of gardening shears lying discarded near a bed of white lilies, their silver blades catching the light. He picked them up, the metal cool beneath his gloved fingers. A faint trace of something dark lingered on the blades. Blood? Or perhaps something else entirely.
What's this? Could it be...
The portrait gallery was a testament to the Caldwell family's lineage, a procession of stern faces staring down from their gilded frames. Generations of wealth and privilege, their eyes seemed to follow Laurence as he moved through the dimly lit space. He paused before a portrait of Mrs. Caldwell, her youthful beauty captured in oils. She wore a gown of the same vibrant green as the lilies in the conservatory, her lips curved into a demure smile. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something cold and calculating that sent a shiver down Laurence's spine.
There's something off about her eyes.
He studied the other portraits, searching for a connection, a clue that might lead him closer to the truth. His gaze lingered on a portrait of Mr. Caldwell, his face etched with arrogance and disdain.
This glass, it's just like the one at the scene.
In the reflection of the glass, barely discernible against the dark background, was a figure, a woman in a green dress. But it wasn't Mrs. Caldwell. The realization struck Laurence like a bolt of lightning. He had been so focused on Mrs. Caldwell, blinded by her grief and apparent vulnerability, that he had failed to consider other suspects. The woman in the reflection, the red-haired woman, she was the key to this puzzle.
I've been looking in the wrong direction all along. Who is she?
He returned to the drawing room where he had first interviewed Mrs. Caldwell. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any clue to the red-haired woman's identity. He noticed a small, silver-framed photograph on a side table, partially obscured by a vase of fresh lilies. He picked it up, his heart quickening as he recognized the woman in the photograph.
There she is. But who is she?
On the back of the photograph, written in a flowing script, was a name, Genevieve.
Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to explain this photograph.
Genevieve.
Her voice was barely audible.
He swore it was over, that she meant nothing to him.
Her words tumbled out in a torrent of anger and betrayal.
I knew about the affair. I tolerated it for the sake of appearances. But when I discovered that Mr. Caldwell had been poisoning Genevieve, slowly and methodically, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I laced his evening brandy with cyanide, using the same poison he had intended for Genevieve. He deserved it. He played with fire and he got burned.
Laurence listened to her confession, his expression unreadable.
It's over now, Mrs. Caldwell. Let the justice system take its course.
He felt a pang of sympathy for this woman, driven to such desperate measures by the cruelty of the man she had loved. But murder was still murder, no matter the justification. Laurence paced the conservatory, the scent of lilies now a sickening reminder of the twisted games people played. Mrs. Caldwell's confession, while shocking, felt incomplete, too neat, too convenient. It was as if she was protecting someone. But who? And why? He stopped before the bed of white lilies, their innocent beauty, a stark contrast to the darkness he felt closing in. His fingers brushed against something cold and smooth hidden amongst the leaves. He parted the foliage carefully, revealing a small silver compact. It was engraved with a single elegant G, Genevieve. A chill ran down his spine. What was Genevieve's compact doing here, hidden in the conservatory? Had she been here after all? He popped open the compact, revealing a mirror on one side and a small compartment on the other. Inside the compartment, nestled amongst a dusting of powder, was a tiny folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded the paper, his pulse quickening as he recognized the handwriting. It was a note, written in a shaky hand, addressed to Mr. Caldwell.
Meet me at the gazebo tonight. I have something important to tell you. Genevieve. I believe you know more than you're letting on, Miss Genevieve. Tell me what really happened to Mr. Caldwell.
Genevieve hesitated, her eyes darting around the gazebo as if searching for an escape route.
I loved him, you know. He promised me the world, said he would leave his wife for me. Foolish girl that I was. I believed him.
She recounted her tumultuous affair with Mr. Caldwell, their stolen moments, his promises of a future together. But as time went on, his promises rang hollow, his affections waning. She discovered he had been stringing her along, using her for his own amusement. And then she found out about the poison.
He was poisoning me, Detective. Slowly, methodically, just like he did to his business rivals.
She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small vial filled with a clear liquid.
He gave me this, said it was a tonic, a gift to make me stronger. But I knew the truth.
Lawrence's eyes widened in recognition. The vial, the liquid, the faint scent of almonds, it was the same poison that had killed Mr. Caldwell. Genevieve had kept a sample, a chilling reminder of his betrayal. But if she didn't kill him, then who did? A figure emerged from the shadows behind Genevieve, a glint of steel catching the moonlight. Mrs. Caldwell stood there, her face a mask of cold fury, a silver-plated ice pick clutched tightly in her gloved hand.
You should have stayed away, Genevieve. He was mine, all mine.
Laurence watched in stunned silence as Mrs. Caldwell lunged at Genevieve, the ice pick raised high. He reacted instinctively, his years of training kicking in. He lunged forward, tackling Mrs. Caldwell to the ground just as the ice pick descended. The sharp point grazed Genevieve's arm, tearing through her sleeve but missing her flesh. Chaos erupted in the gazebo as Laurence struggled with Mrs. Caldwell, the ice pick clattering across the wooden floor. Genevieve screamed, her voice echoing in the night air. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the darkness, growing louder with each passing second. Inspector Davies and his men swarmed the gazebo, apprehending Mrs. Caldwell and securing the scene. As they dragged her away, kicking and screaming, Laurence turned to Genevieve, who stood there pale and shaken but unharmed.
It's over now, Miss Genevieve. You're safe now.
Genevieve nodded, her eyes meeting his with a look of gratitude.
Thank you, Detective Xeon. You saved my life.
Laurence watched as the police car carrying Mrs. Caldwell disappeared down the long drive, its red taillights fading into the night. The case was closed, the truth revealed. But the shadows of the Caldwell mansion's secrets lingered, a chilling reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath even the most polished facade. He adjusted his fedora, a wry smile playing on his lips. Another mystery solved, another life saved. He wouldn't have it any other way. The mansion stood silent now, its secrets seemingly subdued. The sirens had faded into the distance, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. Laurence Xeon stood on the mansion steps, drawing deeply from a cigarette. The scent of lilies, once sweet, now hung heavy with betrayal and death. He flicked the cigarette away, a fleeting spark against the night sky. The case had taken its toll, leaving him drained yet strangely invigorated. He had navigated deceit, unmasked truths, and brought a killer to justice. It was a dangerous game, this pursuit of justice. He turned back to the mansion, its facade now vulnerable in the moonlight. He had glimpsed the darkness beneath its gilded cage. The Caldwells, for all their wealth, were prisoners of their own making. Laurence adjusted his fedora, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He had brought light to their darkness, exposed the festering truth, yet he felt a lingering sadness for the shattered lives and lost love. A lone taxi pulled up to the mansion gates, its headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons. Laurence stepped into the waiting car, leaving behind the shadows and secrets of the Caldwell mansion. He leaned back in the worn leather seat, closing his eyes as the car pulled away from the curb. He had no desire to look back. The mansion, with its tragic history and haunting memories, held no allure for him. He was a detective, a solver of puzzles, a seeker of truth. And the truth he had learned long ago was often found not in grand gestures but in the smallest details, the seemingly insignificant clues that others overlooked. As the taxi sped away into the night, Lawrence's thoughts drifted back to the case, Mrs. Caldwell, consumed by jealousy and driven to desperate measures. Genevieve, a pawn in a deadly game, her life hanging in the balance. And Mr. Caldwell, the architect of his own demise, his web of deceit ultimately unraveling around him. Laurence sighed, a weary sound that spoke of too many late nights and too many encounters with the dark side of human nature. He was tired, but he couldn't shake the feeling that another case, another mystery was just around the corner, and he, Laurence Xeon, would be there to meet it head-on. After all, it was what he did. It was who he was. Subscribe to see Lawrence's next tale.